this story. This is the story of Makoto Koike, a Japanese farmer. The boy at the back is Makoto Koike. The couple in the front are his parents, his mother and father. So his parents are cucumber farmers. His father was very interested in, very particular about the cucumbers, very proud about the cucumbers that he grew. They had to apparently have certain color, certain texture. There are 9 different types of cucumber, and he was very interested, very particular about sorting those cucumbers. So his mother spent all her day sorting those cucumbers, saying that, okay, these are the big ones, these are the spiky ones, these are the brighter ones. So she spent all day sorting the cucumbers, and finally they would go and sell them, and that's how they made their money. Doing this process deteriorated the mother's eyesight. So one day Makoto Koike came back home. He was an engineer. He was, in Silicon Valley somewhere. He was studying in the US. So he came back home and he said, this problem has to be solved. And like I think it was the principal here earlier who was saying that mothers have a great role to play in shaping their child. Well, this mother did. We don't know about everyone, but this mother did, and she shaped the son's character. So he was a caring guy, and he said, let me fix this problem. So he went and he said he took a Raspberry Pi computer and he downloaded Google's TensorFlow, and he took pictures of the cucumbers flowing. They were flowing. He built a little bit of an assembly line. Cucumbers were flowing. He took pictures, and then he said, okay, these can be sorted in this way. He trained the algorithm to sort the cucumbers. So now his mother didn't have to spend any time. They just sent these loads of cucumbers through that assembly line. The Raspberry Pi computer would click a picture, the TensorFlow algorithm would sort it, and then they would get sorted into 9 different bins. Right? So that's what Makoto Koike did. So how did he do that? I mean, what went into doing that? He used a lot of artificial intelligence, but 2 very important other attributes which I will come to. But I want to tell you another story, which is on the next slide. Have you seen this one? It's Google's Duplex. Very popular, it went viral. Ultimately, the robot, the AI, the algorithm, is trying to solve human problems, get things done. So in this case, they said that, okay, I need to take a reservation. The robot, the AI, the algorithm acts just like a human being and takes that order and gets the job done. Right? So how did that happen? How did that happen? That was like a neat AI project, a science project. Right? They built this algorithm, they downloaded free stuff. I mean, it was from Google, so they had access to lots of speech and other information. So anyway, so they did this science project. So if you think about what problems we are trying to solve, it's actually AI is a deeply human endeavor. It's a deeply human pursuit. There is nothing artificial about artificial intelligence. It's so human. It's intricate to how we are evolving. So take a look at this picture. I just want to explain that the complexity of the x-axis is the complexity of the mission, and the y-axis is the complexity of the inputs. As the complexity of inputs grows, and as the mission complexity grows, AI starts to evolve. So on this area, that's the bottom left corner. That's the industrial age, where I don't know if you can tell, but that elevator is one that they used to use in olden times. This particular picture is from Turkey, where there used to be a person standing inside, but that happens in India even now. But there used to also be a person outside who would control the elevator, like manually control. There are levers that they would pull. So that was the industrial age. And then we went to the information age of Googles and Amazons. Then came the AI age with Google Maps. I don't know if you've heard of these 2 companies that are fractal companies, Cure.ai. I'll talk a little bit about that. Cuddle, which is disrupting the world of BI. Amazon Go, you must be very familiar with that. So these are all the AI age. But then there is another next age, right? The humanizing AI age, and that is at the juxtaposition of that is the driverless cars that really needs to make philosophical decisions. In addition to being algorithm, it needs to make philosophical decisions when faced with a choice about whose life to save, a child or an old person. The driverless cars actually incorporate philosophy into how they operate. And common sense. I don't know if you can tell. There's a little bit of gap there. So there's common sense. Common sense, most uncommon of all human traits. Right? Common sense. These are the type of things that are now that we now not need to deal with. Our technology, our evolution needs to address these aspects. So in this deeply human pursuits, the fundamental thing is algorithms. And here's a question for you: who published the first algorithm that we know today? Very good. Absolutely. 3 cheers for you. Next slide. So, Ada Lovelace, dear Ada Lovelace, the daughter of Lord Byron, the great poet. She published the first. She dreamt of this possibility. She said, computers can do everything that human beings can do as long as you break it up into logical steps, anything. The computers can do anything. So she published the first algorithm. In fact, her story is that Lord Byron, as you may know, is a great romantic poet, very famous, very reclusive, and didn't really care for the family or wasn't around. Right? And his mother said, no, Ada, you will not be like your father. You must make something out of your life. So she trained her, and Ada luckily took to numbers and computers, and then she started to build this algorithm. So she published the first algorithm, and I want to also for you to note this thing. I'll read it out. A computer can do anything that can be noted logically: words, pictures, music, not just numbers. Today we can even code music, but she dreamt about it then. She understands. She is the computer. She understands how you take an instruction set and load it into a machine. So I just wanted you to note the pronoun, that when women start to talk about data science, they may use he, but they are more prone to using she. So AI is not enough though. The AI or algorithms is just one aspect of it. And we have, for solving problems at scale, we need 3 things to come together. Right. There is I'll talk about the third thing a little bit later, but there is also the engineering that needs to come together. India is very popular for engineers, right? Since independence, we've established the eminent institutes of engineering, and then that has become the hot field, and we have a lot more engineers. So what does engineering mean? It means that processing large amounts of data, getting lots of data into the machine so that these algorithms can work at scale and develop a point of view on what the scale problem solving looks like. So if you go to the next slide, here's an example of where engineering was actually put to life. Right? This is a doctor. She's looking at the chest X-ray, and there are 100 million chest X-rays that are annually in the US that are examined by radiologists. But what happens to these, because of the manual effort that's needed, the amount of error rate that happens is really high. 20 to 23% error rate. So it's a human error. There is decision fatigue. So they're looking at these X-rays, they make these errors, 20 to 25% error rate. 19% of very critical lung nodules are missed. Right? This is a life and death situation. So this error rate is completely unacceptable. Right? It endangers human life, and after all, we're here to increase. I mean, our mortality has been increasing over the years, and we are here to save human lives. So how can we solve this problem? There is this startup company, Cure.ai, that is part of Fractal. So what they did is 1 million chest X-rays were scanned. 1 million chest X-rays were scanned with collaboration from Mumbai hospitals. And what happened to those 1 million chest X-rays? The algorithms, they started to build the algorithms to process the image and read abnormalities in the data, in that X-ray. Right? And then they created a report like this. Next one. Yeah, next. Yeah, they created a report like this that says, okay, here are the abnormalities in the X-ray. This report is what a doctor would produce. This report is what a radiologist would produce. But now Cure.ai has produced it and says, okay, here are the abnormalities. Take a look at it. Next one. Yes. So, and TB screen is positive. What does the radiologist have to do now? The radiologist has to look at the X-ray and say, okay, yeah, makes sense, or no, this is wrong because this doesn't mean that, right? These are the two input the radiologist can give. But they're already looking at a large amount of, they're already getting some advice on what might be wrong. Right? So the chances of making an error are far lower because this algorithm is in place. So what is it doing? It used engineering by processing lots of images, and it said that it is aiding human intelligence in that manner, right? And here's, I was going to ask you a question, but but the world's first engine, the world's first computer was called ENIAC. Right? It was built by these two wonderful ladies, Jean Jennings and Frances Bylas. So this was around World War II. Software was not cool, hardware was very cool. And so all men went and did hardware, and women were left to do software. And they would be called human computers, meaning that they would actually start to punch numbers and do the calculations. They were very good mathematicians back then, anyway. And so in the process of doing that, they said, okay, we need to do lots of numbers, and we need to build something that can help us, that can make it easier for us. So they put together all the circuitry and all the algorithms that needed to be coded, the sequence of logical steps, so that the large amount of computation at scale could happen. So ENIAC was the first computer that was able to compute at scale, and these two ladies built it. In fact, when the picture first came out, apparently people said that, okay, these are models modeling in front of the computer. They're actually scientists who built that, design. So these are two pillars of what we need to do for scale problem solving. But there is a third and a very important one, and that is design. And this is where the human-computer interaction comes into play. Design is how can we drive impact. And I want to show you a short video of how all of this comes together. This was shot in Paris. This was a social experiment in Paris. Oh.
Go back. Play. Press the space bar.
Because of distraction, and they're crossing the road because of haste, crossing the road when they can't. And they decided that they're going to put all of their intelligence to use and their creative capability. So they installed that billboard that could take instant pictures. They created that sound, right? And at scale, they started to implement it. The result, now this is a proven experiment. There are almost zero. I mean, there are one order. Almost zero. I mean, they've claimed it to be a success. There are no deaths because of this kind of an accident now. And it completely changed the awareness. So this is the design element that we need to bring in when we want to change, when we want to impact, when we want to create an impact. Okay. And one of the examples here in day-to-day life that maybe when you think about careers or when you look at other products that are doing this, is this company, again, a fractal company named Cuddle. I think I saw in the video earlier that you shared, Julian, that there is, you have visualization, how visualization and storytelling is important to communicate, and the data is important to communicate. And we have traditionally been used to, in corporations, seeing large screens with lots of charts in a way of storytelling. But what if Tuttle actually changes that paradigm and says, what if we used just like we consume Facebook, what if businesses consume their information, and they have this mobile-based customized delivery mechanism that disrupts the world of BI. And Cuddle is seeing a little bit of success now in the marketplace, and most of it is because the innovation there is one of design, saying it turned information consumption on its head and say, how would you like to receive the information? You don't want to see 30 different things that you don't need. You want to see only what you want to see, and how can I customize and deliver it to you? So that's the design innovation that happened with Cuddle. So as this famous author, Paola Antonelli, she's an Italian author, director of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She says, good design is a Renaissance attitude that combines technology, cognitive science, human need, and beauty. Now my challenge is to speak above that noise, I think. Human need and beauty to produce something that the world didn't know it was missing. So that, we are here to create an impact. We are here to solve problems at scale, and that can only happen when we bring all of these elements together. So when you think about careers, and how do we craft careers in analytics and AI in this evolving field, think about these three elements, right? Bringing AI, engineering, and design together, and at the intersection of that, nobody can be an expert in all three, not even Einstein, but choose what two edges you want, or go deep in one, or choose any two areas that you want to focus on. So traditionally, data scientists have been the AI, right? Even this conference, there was a lot of reference to it. Data science is, the AI experts are data scientists. But think about bringing engineering together to see how data and engineering, AI and engineering come together to create an AI engineering discipline that might be of greater interest to you. Think about how design comes into, design and AI can come together to create a decision architecture type of career for you. Ultimately, you should only do, next one, you should only do what is at the intersection of these three. What is our calling in life? Right? It's pleasure, meaning, and strength. When these three come together, that's when you get a certain flow in your life. What is pleasure? Things that give you enjoyment. It's a hobby. If you didn't have to work and do anything, you would pursue that all the time. That's what gives you pleasure. What is meaning? Meaning is something that gives you fulfillment. At the end of doing all of that, you feel like this is what I was born to do. I have made a difference to the world. Right? That's meaning. And what is strength? Not only does it give you pleasure, and not only do you feel fulfilled, but you're actually good at it. Other people say, "Wow, I can do what you've done." Right? Or you can see from around you that it comes naturally to you. You're great at it. You can keep learning, and you can become better at it. So that's strength. Right? That's where your natural strengths are. So find it. Right? Look for it. Go on your own self-discovery. Find it and bring these together. And that's what calling should look like. Because remember, you may be at different stages of your career. You may have spent 20 years in college, but as Christine Lagarde says, automation will create new jobs, but 66% of the jobs in the future do not exist today. They don't exist today. So it is not about going to college for 20 years and learning and then sticking with that career for the rest of your life. It is about learning every day. And how can you learn every day? Only when you bring your pleasure, meaning, and strength together. And that's when you can say that, okay, I can evolve myself, I can develop myself, I can get somewhere. Today, if you have children in school today, if you have young people that are in school today, what do we need to teach? We don't need to teach specific skills that they will pick up. That there is a whole system that's doing it. But we need a selection of skills, like the critical problem solving skills, right? Critical thinking, and questioning the status quo. Remembering that not being too sure of oneself. This is not a problem women usually have, but it is a general problem in the world. Being too sure of oneself. When you don't know enough, sometimes you're too sure of yourself. And sometimes you feel overconfident. And so being too sure and thinking that there's only one right answer. Many times context matters, context changes everything. The answers could be different based on the context. So there are these multiple skills, but there's one more that I want to focus on, which is ethical leadership. Our humanity and human beings progress only through values and ethical leadership, and having that integrity and having that courage to stand by your values and to see the reflection of your values in your environment is a really important trait that determines success. Remember that the best work can happen only when you can be free from when you experience freedom, when you can bring your whole self to wherever it is that you're working, whether it is a startup company, whether it is a large company, whether it is an NGO, whether it is a college, anywhere else. You have to experience that freedom and feel free to be yourself, and that's when magic can happen. And when you are leading it, please remember that ethical leadership is one of the most important traits that will help you create that environment when you are in charge. Uniquely human skills are the ones that we must now develop. We must all develop. Empathy, creativity, adaptability, originality. These are uniquely human. Robots will not replace. Despite all the doomsday messages we have seen about AI, what AI cannot do and what we as human beings must guide AI to do is to be original, to be empathetic to human beings, and to bring that creativity into this world that otherwise that only a thinking human can do. That's what we need to be more human. And that's what is required of us. And we can guide the AI, but humanity can only come from human beings, and that's what is needed from us. And I want to just now focus a little bit about why women and why all of us, why this conference, why do we need to focus on this? Just there are a lot of numbers on this chart, but I will point your attention to just two things. Look at the first one. That shows that 74% of all people in STEM careers are men. 74%. Any guesses how many men are on the planet? Percentage? What is the percentage of men on the planet?
3.5 billion.
Yeah?
Half of 7 billion.
Yes? 50%. So here are the other 50%. Right? Why is there an overrepresentation? Why isn't there an equal representation? Okay, there are all kinds of things that we get around biological limitations, etc. I really do hope that you do your research, you think about it, and you come to the conclusion that there is a lot of voodoo science going on in that area. Then there is another fact that I want to bring to your attention, which is that out of every 100 people who join for a bachelor's program, only 12 graduate with a STEM degree, and only 3 remain in STEM careers after a few years. So from 100 to 3, that is the drop that our industry experiences. 100 join for a bachelor's in STEM degree, along the way they change. Only 12 graduate. Of the 12, only 3 remain in those careers. Why does that drop happen? Have we created a world that is so incompatible for women that women don't survive, that women don't sustain? Data sciences is deeply human. AI is deeply human. Why aren't women naturally drawn to it? Why is there something that we are doing or we can do to stop this? So here's a tribute that I believe we are all here because of Grace Hopper, amazing Grace. And she is the one who spearheaded this movement in this industry. She is the one who was an inspiration for all women data scientists. She is the one who actually said, my life, right, I want to help other women. Right? She was not satisfied by being the only woman in the room. She wanted to inspire other women to join her. She created scholarships. She is the reason a lot of data science for women is happening. No doubt about it. She is the one that led the path. So I will end with this message from this poet Rita Dove. She says, there are no curses, only mirrors, held up to the souls of gods and mortals. And so I give up this fate too, this fate meaning the woman's fate. Believe in yourself, go ahead, see where it gets you. Because that's what we need to do, to believe in ourselves, to to get where we need to. And with that, I invite you to be the role models that you all can be. I invite you to shatter that glass ceiling that we all talk about all the time. And I invite all the men in the room to be an allies in this movement of creating an equal world, of equal opportunity, because equality and feminism actually is about believing that all human beings are created equal. So with that, the promise of artificial intelligence will come to life.